Hi, I'm Dr. Tori Olds. Today I would like to talk with you about experiential ways of working in therapy. So by experiential, I mean incorporating some element of mindfulness. And I thought I would use that word because it is one that's very familiar or common in our culture right now. But here I'm using it less to describe a discrete practice, like a meditation practice, and more simply as a type of stance or awareness or focus, in this case, inwardly. So when the mind can focus, like instead of paying attention or focusing on the outside world, can pick as its point of focus itself, so the mind coming in contact with the mind, it is really powerful. Because it's really hard to shift something that we're not aware of. But I will say this mind coming in contact with the mind, it's different than thinking about ourselves or analyzing ourselves. And a lot of people get confused about that, and they think the way to understand themselves better or to grow is to think a lot or analyze themselves. But that would be akin to trying to understand another person by thinking about them. You may get somewhere with that, but probably you won't understand them as much through thinking about them as you would through simply listening to them. So in this way of working, we're trying to shift from thinking about ourselves to listening to ourselves. And by listening, I mean really paying attention to our unfolding process, like what is happening in our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, emotions. What is happening, for instance, maybe as I'm talking about this, or as you said that, wow, I noticed I just went blank. Or I had this thought and I just got really anxious. But instead of just trying to regulate that anxiety, sort of listening to it in a way, in other words, tuning in to see what we know about it or can sense about perhaps what I'm anxious about. Like, oh, when I slow down with that, I think I was worried you were judging me, what I just said right there. And that sort of moment by moment, just noticing what's actually coming up into our awareness and experience sort of sheds a light on how we process each moment. And we can really sort of peek into how our mind works. And that kind of tracking is much more productive than simply analyzing our past or thinking about it or storytelling in terms of the events of our week. So why does that take the help of therapy? Well, because it's hard to be mindful. Not only did most of us not have parents that did mindfulness practice with us, helped us be really attuned to ourselves, taught us to be self-aware. Most of us didn't have parents that really trained us in that way. But additionally, most of us had parents that specifically trained us not to pay attention to ourselves, not to be aware of our emotions or truth or our pride or sexuality or needs. Why? Because any of those things that came from inside us threatened or messed with our parent in some way. So without really realizing it, they gave us the message, just keep that inside. And when we notice that our parent seems to not like or be scared by or freaked out by or just simply not valuing and ignoring some part of our own expression or mind, we get conditioned to ignore that or control it or suppress it as well. So let me say that one more time. I believe that most of us have been conditioned to ignore ourselves, which makes learning mindfulness or self-awareness really difficult. Maybe a more blunt way to say it would be, our parents were freaked out by us, so we learned to be freaked out by us. And that's really a problem for us to be, in some sense, scared of ourselves, our own mind, our emotions, an impulse, a memory, anything from inside, because there's really only two ways that fear can manifest. And one is that suddenly everything from inside seems really overwhelming. When you're scared of something, it's easy to sort of become frozen in the face of it. So that as an emotion comes up, let's say, if you find it frightening or shameful, or you fear the rejection around it, or that it will be overwhelming, it's almost like we can become frozen, and then it's like flooding our system, and it seems more overwhelming than it would need to seem. Or, on the other hand, we can go to the other extreme and sort of become hyper-regulating and controlling of the thing that we don't think is good. So that looks like getting busy, getting distracted, not knowing what we feel. A sort of similar version of that, but has its own flavor, is just shutting down entirely and becoming depressed. And those symptoms are just part and parcel of not having an empowered stance toward our own mind, where we can approach it with skill and presence and awareness. Because again, it's hard to shift something or work with something when you can't be aware of it, when you can't sort of track what's going on inside of it. And there is just no way to practice that without our therapist asking us, what are we noticing, feeling, or impulses or thoughts or our experience that's coming up in the moment, because that's where our mind is happening. That's where we can track it and understand it. It's like picking up something that you're wanting to shift and actually taking it into your hands and looking at it, rather than just trying to work with it in a state that's blind. So in case that seems really abstract, I'll just give a kind of simple, short example of what this might look like. So let's say somebody is coming in with depression, and they're noticing sort of in session as they're talking that a particularly strong sense of depression or depressed mood kind of came over them. So if they had that awareness, they might notice that moment, one, and they could slow it down and think, okay, wow, what were we talking about right when that shift occurred? Okay, we were talking about my brother, and if I sense in and slow that down, there's this flash of anger that comes. So then some curiosity might come right there of like, I wonder if there's a link there between my anger and the depression coming. And when I put some mindfulness on it, when I notice it, yeah, I can sense there's something, like my anxiety goes up. There's something that feels really dangerous about feeling angry toward my brother. And now maybe some more awareness can come if they simply notice what else comes to mind or associations or inner reactions to begin to piece together an understanding of where their depression is sort of manifesting from as a way of kind of defending against damaging their relationship with their brother who maybe can't handle their anger. So every time they have a spike of anger, they shut it down and shut themselves down by getting depressed instead. That would be really hard to understand the workings of that without sort of tracking it in the moment and really listening inside to what the mind has to say about it. And what's cool about experiential ways of working is not only is that mindful, like tracking of experience, what allows the insight to come up and the understanding of the mind and where it needs some help to shift, but also it's through having a new experience that shift can happen. In other words, a therapist might say, okay, so if it's the fear of the anger or the discomfort around the anger and the habit to go to depression instead that's the issue, maybe we can work to practice allowing your system to have a bit of anger in a way, again, that feels empowering, grounded, and safe, and yet there's still awareness and space so that the anger can simply be felt and not suppressed through depression. And if that shift can happen, then sort of the unconscious need for the depression lifts and the depression itself can sort of resolve. So hopefully I've piqued your curiosity about experiential ways of working in therapy. There's so many different types of modalities, it would be hard to name them all. I'll just throw a few acronyms at you in case you want to do a little bit more research. You can look these up. I tend to integrate AEDP. That's one of the main ones I use, AEDP. I bring in with it IFS, coherence therapy, somatic experiencing. With couples, I tend to draw on PACT, a PACT approach. And I really enjoy not only integrating these modalities in my own work, but training therapists in terms of how to integrate experiential ways of working in their own work. So I focus a lot on training our therapists here at Eddy Psychotherapy, but also I do a lot of online training. So if you're a therapist wanting to train with me, you can check out toriolds.com. And I have quite a few courses there for which you can also get CEUs. So if you're a client, I really encourage you to find a therapist who can work with you, who can work more experientially. And if you're in Austin, of course, you can come to my center, Eddy Psychotherapy. Because for me, when we can come into contact with ourselves, that's when we're actually able to most deeply develop ourselves. Thank you.